from Dubai.
Oh my God, it's still amazing. The 8 hours and the connection is unbelievable. I was telling Maria folks that New York City was 90 degrees yesterday. Today it's 60. I thank God every day that there's no such thing as global warming.
Or are we going to go there today, Jack?
Yeah, it's every day. It's literally every day that something interesting is going on. Um, yeah. Anyway, so last week are we starting?
We are live. I'm just looking at my NASA station here. We are live on YouTube. We are live on LinkedIn, and we are live on Instagram. Go for it. Take it away, Jack.
Excellent. So if you followed us last week, and I hope you do, we're doing this on a weekly basis. We ended the conversation last week, and I left you with a somewhat of a teaser line, and it goes right into the topic of today's conversation in terms of risk reward, stay, go. And what happened to me is last week I told you that I took a career risk that cost me $1 million. And the real question was I running towards something or running away from it? And most people won't even look at what's driving them, because once you do, you can't really hide behind the story you're telling yourself. A lot of us like to pretend we're choosing between risk and stability, and we're really not. We're choosing between uncertainty and a price we're paying for it. If I had slowed down for even a second, I would have asked myself only two questions that matter, and there's really only two. First, am I uncomfortable in my career or am I unhappy? Uncomfortable is growth. Unhappy is misalignment. The second question that I always ask is the cost hypothetical, or is it happening to me right now? And what I've learned is risk is hypothetical. Unhappiness is already taking something from you. Here's where I blew it, and totally I blew it. I get bold enough to admit, when I make mistakes. I wish I knew it back then, but I blew it because I really wasn't thinking. I wasn't choosing. What was I doing? I was reacting. And that mistake is where the story starts. I grew up with two things working against me. First, I had asthma. I was sick constantly. I was always a kid in gym class with a doctor's note. Please excuse Jack from gym class. He had an asthma attack the night before. Second, I had a very, very strict father who had one rule. He said, you could be sick at home or sick at school. Go be sick at school and learn something. Wasn't happy about that. The translation for me was show up, push through, perform, get over yourself, right? Then, I got into my career and, I reference Gray Advertising a lot. And one of the accounts I worked on was Fruit of the Loom. And, with typical big companies, this was $1 billion company worldwide, all over the place. They do performance reviews. And I had really, really good traction on that piece of business. My clients love me. And I had gone through 3 bosses. The last boss I had sits me down and give me all kinds of hearts and flowers. Everybody loves you. And I'm nodding, yeah. Like, I know all that. But if anybody's had a performance review, there's always one line in the performance review that says, needs for improvement. And I said, all right, I'm totally open. Like, what could it possibly be? Maria, this was many, many decades ago. I still remember verbatim the line that Jack needs for improvement. Are you ready for this?
Go for it.
Jack has a difficult time dealing with incompetent people. I went crazy. I went berserk. I lost it. I said, oh my God, we're supposed to be the greatest advertising agent in the world, and I should do it. I went nuts. I think I scared this guy. I really, really scared him. To this day, I don't know if I was more upset with Jack has a difficult time dealing with incompetent people or it took me a really, really long time to understand how smart and brilliant and concise that this boss was, because he was right. And I am still flabbergasted to this day. The reality was that, he used the wrong word. Okay. These people weren't incompetent. They just didn't have the same drive or urgency or standards that I held to myself. Okay. I let that irritation masquerade as a strategy. And I said, I can't work for this guy. I'm going to leave. And I wound up looking for another job. Right. But I told myself, I was running towards something better, when reality, I was sprinting away from someone who pushed every button that I had. And honestly, that's how smart people like me, okay, make stupid decisions. And I did. I let emotion drive as opposed to logic, overcoming where I was, right? So here's the part that, everybody ignores that I did specifically. If I had stayed, I would have walked out with over $1 million in profit sharing. That's what I left on the table after a stupid mistake, an emotional mistake, right? Not because I knew what I was doing, because I was young. I was triggered, and it cost me $1 million, right? Most people think that choosing between taking a risk or staying to the plan, but half the time the real choice is really much simpler. Are you making a decision or having a reaction? And clearly, I had a reaction. So let's get into it, Maria. What do you take from the Jack has a difficult time dealing with incompetent people and losing $1 million off of that?
Well, I have to say, so many things to say, but I think the story, what you're sharing right now, reminds us that we're not robots, that we're actually humans, and work is a human experience. And maybe you saved yourself from $1 million in health and wellness, receipts. Who knows, Jack? I think the topic today is taking the leap. When do you know when the risk is worth the risk? Would you say now, upon reflection, that you took a risk, and if it wasn't for the money, you wouldn't be feeling like it was an expensive risk?
It's a good point. If I didn't take the risk, I really wouldn't be who I am. And I moved around a lot. A lot of it was because I was unhappy, or I didn't think it was moving fast enough, or I didn't have somebody that I respected. So I've worked in an awful lot of advertising agencies on hundreds of brands. It's given me, okay, in hindsight, after many, 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 many decades, it's giving me the hindsight of that experience has put me where I am today. I couldn't do what I'm doing now if I didn't have all those experiences. And honestly, I am really, really honest with myself. I may not have lasted, okay, to walk away with that $1 million worth of profit sharing. I was always the outliner. I was always the kid that was in trouble. So who knows if I would have ever lasted, at a big company like that. But I think those experiences, it's risk reward, and you make the best decision at the moment. My life would have been very, very different if I wound up walking away, retiring with that $1 million profit sharing check. But I wouldn't have had all of the experiences. And I think the really interesting question is does money outweigh the experience?
I don't know. That's a different conversation completely. I think there's a lot of people out there thinking, give me the money and I'll think about it and let you know. But you mentioned something else about you might not have lasted long enough. So right there, you already know in your gut that it was time to go. So I think sometimes we put money as the ticket that makes us justify staying in a place where we know we can't grow. And the only way to grow is to go, really. The second thing I heard you say was that it really did feel like time to go. I mean, you said it without saying it, but it was time to go. It was definitely time to go. And I think that's an important one for anyone listening right now is we already know when it's time to go and leave an organization. Like you already know, it's a gut feeling. It's, do you have the courage to go? You mentioned that, staying, like building all those experiences. And this is where I see the differing factor with younger generations today. They won't stay out of loyalty, and they won't stay just because older generations are like, you got to kind of earn your stripes and stay. And I think there's value in that. It's like, I'm not growing. This is not taking me down the path that I hoped it would. Better to leave now than to give it another year, 2 years, 5 years, 15 years, and kind of go. So when you look at it that way, I don't see it as a risk. I don't see leaving as the risk. I see the risk is staying and losing a part of your career identity or a part of your potential because you're too scared to take a different path. That's how I see risk in the workplace. How does that land for you?
I think, the reality kind of goes back to also last week is it's such an individual assessment that you have to make. Who are you? Where are you? What's the situation? For me, yes, it was time to leave, but I did it for the wrong reason. It was an emotional decision. And I think emotion is always going to override intellect. And that's hard. I think it's a really, really difficult thing because, young people today, I think what they've been trained to think about, which I think is really, really accurate, is years and years and years ago, the loyalty factor was you are loyal, you show up every day, you do a good job, you have a job for life. That stopped existing 25 years ago, where companies basically said, it's not personal, it's a business decision. We have to let you go. And I think, people like me that grew up in that environment, were devastated. Like, I did everything right. Like, how could you be firing me? So what's happened is that people have been trained to say, if there's no loyalty on your side, I'm not going to have that loyalty either. But the flip side of it is that there are people that have stayed in companies for a long, long period of time. I work with a guy, we started exactly the same time. He walked out with that $1 million profit sharing. I didn't, but anyway, I think it's
Listen,
really
Jack, we woke up this morning to the news. 8,000 jobs were cut at Meta. They received an email at 4 a.m. Right.
Wow.
So imagine waking up for work and noticing a notification and opening it up to find out that while you were sleeping, your employer, said it was time to go. And I think, the risk in staying in today's world when there are no loyalty is not a two-way street, and it's not personal, it's business. And I think when those stakes are that high, the risk is putting all of your chips in a basket of, employment where that 9 to 5 may be pulled under your rug. So I think anyone in today's world, regardless of your age or stage, you should be prepared for door number 2 before you need to open door number 2. And I think, unfortunately, Gen X are waiting too long to do that. They're kind of still waiting for when they have to. But Gen Z and the younger, is it Generation Alpha, these younglings, they're like, I'm in it for me, and that's how it's going to be. And we're seeing that challenge. So you're right. I do see risk as subjective, but I think the biggest risk is to feel scared, stuck, not really know how to move and pivot because you waited and trusted that your employer would take care of you. And we're not seeing that anymore. That doesn't, it's, I think that's a unicorn company when those stories of employers really putting people first. I think that's a unicorn company. And I know that's a large statement, but not too long ago, Amazon did something very similar, right? So we have to protect ourselves.
Yeah, but there's the classic cliche in the advertising business is the day you get your job, the day you get a new job is the day that you update your resume. And you know what? It's unfortunate because from both sides of the coin, the employers are lamenting that we don't have dedicated employees. People are out for themselves. The employee is having the same conversation where how can I trust that I do a good job and you're going to keep me? So it's a really really precarious. People are on edge no matter what's going on in the world. The basic everyday life is you need to continue to project, where am I now? Where do I want to go? How do I know how to get there? And most importantly, take away nothing beyond this one statement. How do I know when I arrived? And that's the hard part. How do you know when you're satisfied? How do you know that what you have done accomplishes your objective? So it's, these are big, wide ranging philosophical conversations, but they're based on reality. Where do you start? Do you start from a very, very young age, planning out your career? One of the great cliches is if you want to make God laugh, tell him what your plans are, right? That's the same thing about a career. No matter what you do, you're never, ever going to be on that consistent path. And I think selfishly, what makes me me is I love the journey. That's the exciting part of life, like seeing where you wind up, seeing how it plays out. But you're dealing with real life and families and money and health and everything else. So it's hard. Life is hard.
Well, I think, when you think about career, and I'm not going to get too theoretical today. We oversimplify the entire process. We oversimplify the process, and we make assumptions about career as like this huge decision to make. But actually, you break it down into life milestones. Donald Super said it best in his self-concept theory of your life is a series of milestone events, and your career is part of that journey. So when young people are making that first career decision, we have to, as an older influencer generation, stop making the assumption on, projecting that assumption that that first choice will be this like daunting forever choice. And we need to normalize the pivots. I think it's generations where people got a job for life, as you said earlier on, that look at these younger career decisions that younger people are making and say, oh no, that's a risky career. You shouldn't really do that. So today I had a conversation with parents, and they were saying, what's your advice? My child wants to be a YouTuber. And I'm like, from the lens of a parent who's looking at that 9 to 5, that might seem a daunting career. But for a young person who's got no responsibility, we're going into it, I would get them researching, exploring, really looking at the entire picture of what it takes to be a YouTuber, how you can monetize, what are the expected earnings, what type of behind the scenes you need to be doing, and how long you can see yourself doing that before you take that next career pivot. So when you are planning, I know you were like, the plan and everything goes, but the plan feels like you have some type of a solid foundation to land on if things kind of, come to pieces. So I am fond of the plan, But I also think that the risk, we have to go into career and go, okay, what's the biggest risk that I need to take to move the dial to the next level, and what would I tolerate in taking that risk? What type of experiences might I be falling into if I leave this company or go into entrepreneurship? I think we need to think about not just a fixed plan, but where does risk fit into the plan when plans have to change? I don't know. I was rambling.
Yeah, I think that there's a number of comments on that. For me, if I were to advise a young person, I think the ability to look at yourself, number one, who are you? The time to take a risk is when there is the lowest risk possible, and that's when you're starting out. So take that risk, experiment. I'll give you a business analogy. I think one of the best companies in the world I ever worked for was, strangely enough, Legs Pantyhose. And they had a philosophy that said, we are totally, unequivocally against the philosophy of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I said, geez, that's interesting. Why do you say that? And they said, the time to break something is when there's no risk. Okay, business is doing well. We have the money to test and to experiment. And I use that same analogy for people, starting a career. Take a risk at that point in time. You don't want to take the risk when you got the family and the house and the kids and the mortgage and all of those expenses. That's not the time to take a risk, unless that's the environment that you're in and you have to. So I think the understanding of risk adverse, being risk adverse, has to fit into your personality. For me, I was always risk averse, but my life was put in a situation where I constantly had to take risks. So it's individual, number one. Number two, look at, for me, planning it out. Take the risk when you're young. Be prepared to reinvent yourself, because I guarantee the next 100 years of people's lives are going to be constantly reinventing themselves. Last week's conversation about AI, in terms of AI, oh my God, everybody's bitching and moaning and complaining, it's changing our lives, and we're going to be out of a job. Get over yourself. That's where the world goes. It constantly has to be new and improved. You've got to be prepared for change. In order to change, you've got to be planning enough to say, if this doesn't work out, what's plan B? What's option 2, 3, 4, and 5? Because what is, one of my philosophies is, everything is predictably unpredictable. You never ever know what's going to happen, but something's going to happen, especially in careers. Plan for that change, plan for that unexpected situation, because it's going to happen to you. I don't care, you're a lawyer, an accountant, a doctor. Your life is going to change because the world is changing faster than you anticipated.
Can I just add, like, listening to you now, I totally resonate about the planning ahead, but I'd like to kind of nudge people in a different direction with the planning. The planning is not always about what if it goes wrong. The planning is, where do I want to move forward from here, right? So, like, when I think back on my career, I didn't have career guidance as a teenager, which is probably part of the story of why I do what I do. But I didn't have that guidance. I didn't learn how to have a strategy. My only strategy was, you got to be employed. Whatever you do, you got to be employed. I had to feel productive. It was just in my DNA, right? So I was always able to find a job. But did the younger me have a strategy and why she was choosing those jobs? Or, was I just on the treadmill and kind of taking the next job? And I think in early part of my career, I was looking for experience first, and then I was looking for benefits second. And it makes a lot of sense when you look at the life stage I was in. But it was when I had my first performance review with a principal in a very incredible school, and this principal was very growth minded, and actually he was a wonderful ally to all of his teachers, and I never remember hearing him dismiss anybody's ideas. So imagine me, younger me, I probably wasn't even 30 at the time, and he says to me, Maria, where do you see yourself in 5 years? That was the first time anyone ever asked me that question. And you know, naive, blind, I don't know, whatever way you want to describe me, I look over and go, I want to be sitting on your side of the desk in 5 years. And he didn't laugh at me. He was like, okay, so how do you think you're going to get there? That was the time that I went home that day and went, wait, like, how am I going to get there? Right. And that, I think, was the question that nudged me to the next decisions. And that's when, not too long after that conversation, I started taking micro credentials into executive coaching. And then I made my way out of full-time teaching and into consultancy, right? But if I had not had that question asked to me, Jack, I don't know if I would have even had the thought of like, wait, what do I want to be doing, right? So I think sometimes the plan, we make the assumption that we're planning for a rainy day, we're planning for what if, but wait a minute, what if we flip it and go, I'm not planning for what if, I'm planning for what's next, right? So you're finding next, Jack. So I'm planning for the like, what's next, not if this falls through. And I think this is one of the areas I see often. We're constantly making young people create these career plans based on fear of not making enough or getting further enough, or, you know, like, I want to be a YouTuber. Okay, how are we going to do that? As opposed to, oh, wait a minute, what if it doesn't work? Like, what's plan B, right? No, it's like, great, let's get that started. How are we going to make that happen? And where do you want to pivot from there when that kind of like that experience, you've lived it, you've done it, you got the t-shirt, you want to move forward. So I think, again, I'm coming back to my first premise of like, I think the biggest risk people make in their career is playing safe and playing small. And it's the risk of not achieving your full potential, experiencing your full potential. And I don't mean that in a fairy tale way. I mean, what if it's an amazing experience and the thing that stopped you was staying in that place that you thought you'd feel safe for a while, and then you wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning and you realize the safe space is not as safe as you thought, and now what?
Yeah, see, you know, your premise is irrefutable. Okay, totally buy that. But I come at it in terms of my life, fortunately or unfortunately, everything I do based upon my career, my business. So the plan, the marketing plan, the communication, the advertising plan has built into it both components. How do I move forward? What are the upside potential, downside risks? So I always look at it as a complete 360 environment that I have to look at. How do I launch a product, a service? How do I launch my career? How do I go forward? What happens? I've got to anticipate what are the obstacles. You know, people would always ask me, what do you do for a living, Jack? You know, honestly, I would say I deal with obstacles. I want to know why somebody won't do something. If I can figure out what the obstacle is to overcome, I can then start to develop strategies in anticipation of. That's why the legs pantyhose concept is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, is totally wrong. Break it now, so in anticipation of when it breaks, you have the foresight, the strategies, the understanding of the options. Here is what I can do when something goes wrong. But your first step is totally right. go forward, be positive, take the risks when you have the opportunity to take those risks. And when you're young, that's the most opportune time. Do anything you want, but it has to fit within what makes you you. And that's the biggest mistake I see with people. I told you the story about the woman who wanted to get, make a lot of money, get into sales, and she was an introvert and she hated people. How could that make any sense? But that, if anybody else looked at her, they would have figured out a way to get into sales. So you got to figure out who you are, go forward, create the contingencies. And I think that's what I do that's very, very different from other people. I always want to know what the problems are. If everybody, if you're destined to be an attorney or a doctor, that's great. That's only 0.5% of the world. What's everybody else do? You want to be a YouTube blogger? That's fabulous. Okay. But figure out, does this make sense for me? Is it achieving my short-term objectives? And what are the downside risks that I can identify?
Sounds great. And there we are. It is time to wrap it up. I love this conversation. I feel like we were playing two sides of the coin, looking at it from different perspectives. I also see that it offers our viewers the opportunity to kind of self-explore as well. I feel like today was more about a thinking out loud, comparing stories, but also being able to look at risk through a different lens, which is very, very important. Any last thoughts for today before we say goodbye, Jack?
No, I think, the conclusions or the recommendations are, what works best for you at this moment in time, because it's going to change in the future. Nothing stays the way they are, and it shouldn't. People need to evolve, the world needs to evolve, and you better understand that that's going to happen to you in your life, in your career.
I love that. And guess what? We are living in the future. When we started this, it was 30 minutes ago. We are now in the future. So I love saying that. And some people think that's really silly, but the future doesn't have to be this like far distance place. It can literally be a couple of minutes from right now. So great, great, great. And while we were having this conversation, I also was reflecting, and I think my takeaway from today is there is always a 2% truth that what you think it is could actually be something different. So don't be afraid of risk. I think, Jack, taking risk when you're young, again, is it better to take it when you're young? Definitely, if we're looking at it through the lens of like, what do I have to lose? But when you're young, your identity is shaping. And so for a young person, that can feel like everything in that first risk. So I love it. I love it. What are we going to talk about next week, Jack?
You know what? I'm not really sure yet. I think I'd like to go back and look at, we had a conversation about, these kind of topics. I don't really have a topic for next week, but we'll definitely create one, unless you're thinking of something that comes out of this conversation.
Yeah, I'm thinking, I've had a couple of conversations pop up this week, and they all hovered around Gen X. So those people born between, I don't know what year, is it 1968? I'm not sure. Anyway, they're those mid-career, too young to retire, too old to say, for the ego to say, I'll accept that entry-level job, or so they think. And what I've seen in these conversations this week is they're afraid of the pivot. They don't know how to pivot, but they're not ready to think entrepreneurial. And we're living in an ageist world of work where the younger you are, I don't know, it just seems like the world of work for the younger generation. And I'm seeing people in that Gen X category quietly, looking for support, but too afraid to put their hand up and go, is anyone going to pay attention here? So I don't know. I'm thinking, why don't we talk to that generation next week and see how we can bring a conversation to the platform to create a safe space where they could take away, some of the questions they might be having about their own pivots. Because let's be honest, when you're entering the world of work, being told that you're, going to be made redundant is hard. But when you're in your 50s and you're told that you're going to be made redundant, it's hard in a different way. And also trying to find that next opportunity, what I'm seeing is you're not having to justify your experience. You're having to justify that you're still relevant and that your experience and knowledge is not outdated, which I think is a challenge we're not talking enough about.
Okay, so here is the tease for next week. Okay, I always need your stimulus to create an idea. What you're talking about is exactly what I do. Finding Next specifically helps the mid-career people answer a question that I guarantee you they have not found anywhere. And the question is, within my skill set, what else can I do? I'm in a situation where I've baselined out, I've flatlined out. I can't grow, I can't go anywhere else, but I don't know what else I can do with the talent, the experience, the skills that I already have. And how do I translate that to something else that I can't identify? So the question I would encourage us to explore, because this is what I do for a living, is, within my skill set, what else can I do?
Love that. And will the employer accept me? Or am I going to become an employer myself? Love it. Love it. Okay, we're going to tweak that topic, definitely. Gen X, if you're listening, next week is all about you. Thanks, Jack, for being with me again today. And I know we have next week planned, and will we continue? Won't we continue? Let's leave that as a teaser and let everybody know next week. Okay. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.